Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Unbroken, the podcast where we talk about emotional wellness. And my name is Cathy Wheaton Bird, and my co host is Julianna.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm so excited about just working on this podcast with you, Julianna. It's been a lot of fun so far, and I've learned so much. Thank you.
And I'm having I don't know if I'd say fun, but I'm really liking just talking about our emotions and mental health. It's something I've always been interested in.
Great. I think a lot of people will learn as much as we're learning by listening. And I'm excited about our second podcast episode. And Juliana is going to talk to us about anxiety. This is something we hear about a lot nowadays. So I guess I'll just jump right into it then, Juliana, and ask you the first question. Can you tell us what is anxiety and how is it different than actual worrying?
So, anxiety is your body's natural response to stress. It's a feeling of fear or apprehension, usually about what's to come. Worrying is having nervous thoughts about something and can lead to anxiety. Some people get anxious now and then, and some people have anxiety almost constantly. That's called general anxiety disorder, and that's what I have.
Okay, so can you describe how does anxiety actually feel?
It can vary from person to person and in severity. Sometimes it's just feeling restless or worried or trouble concentrating, trouble sleeping, can have dizziness, a pounding heart. Um, but it's usually a feeling of fear. Like imagine you're walking to your car, you're alone, and then someone jumps out of nowhere and they have a gun on you. You'd be scared. So imagine you're feeling that amount of fear. You're in the face of danger, and then imagine just trying to like turn that fear off. That wouldn't be able to happen. And anxiety, it's that like it can be that level of fear, but there's no danger at the moment. It's usually about uncertainty, about what could happen. And it's often very hard to just like snap your fingers and turn that off because that fear does feel very real. Um, Sometimes when I'm feeling anxious, like very anxious, um, I get that feeling of fear that can like be in your chest. My chest gets tight. I start to feel kind of dizzy. I feel lightheaded. I can feel my heart pounding. My breath gets like shallow and fast. And I think the first time I had an anxiety attack, my lips were feeling numb because the way that I was breathing was very fast and shallow. And I had no idea what was happening. It felt like I was gonna die. Like there was this feeling of like impending doom. And I went to the hospital. They checked everything, said, you're likely having an anxiety attack. And I was like, you guys are crazy. Something's wrong with me. But no, it was panic.
Wow, that sounds so scary to go through
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And thank you so much for sharing that. It is very different than worrying. And I think it's really important for people to understand that there's a huge difference. So I know you've been looking at kind of what it is that might cause you to feel that way, and then also doing some research. So can you give us a bit of info on kind of what can cause anxiety?
There are quite a few causes, like overthinking a situation, stress can lead to anxiety, unpredictability in your life. Some researchers have suggested that overactivity in some areas of the brain can cause anxiety, or a chemical imbalance in the brain between dopamine and serotonin, your DNA. a history of trauma or stressful experiences, even just one time, can make you fear that thing happening at any moment. Um, and if something traumatic or stressful does happen, it can cause something in your brain to try to adapt to a stressful environment. It's like your brain's kind of always on and tries to always be aware to prepare for danger. So it's like you're always on this precipice of this flight or fight response, especially for like generalized anxiety and for people who have PTSD. Um, so that flight or fight response can become overactive. I have some more notes.
Okay, so it's kind of like you're on high alert, I guess, and it can be triggered quite easily then, I guess, eh? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, for some people, like, uh, I used to get teased a lot, and we moved around constantly. So I would go to a new school, and I'd kind of have this fear that kids would just start teasing me and like laughing at me for whatever reason. And I still kind of feel like that fear even as an adult. If I start a new job, I'm like quiet and I'm like just kind of testing the waters to see if these people are nice or not. And they usually are, but it's just that fear from like when I was a kid, it's still there.
Okay. Wow, that's really insightful how you described it in terms of getting a better understanding of what it's like. So, how did and how does anxiety affect your life, or how did it before?
Well, I have the generalized anxiety, which could be kind of a symptom of my childhood, which was unpredictable, and there were some traumas. And I also could have inherited something from my dad's side because my half sister through my dad also has generalized anxiety disorder. I think it's more social anxiety, but it's still there. But I overthink things a lot. I used to be so held back by this fear that I never really did much. I never took any chances. And it wasn't until I was like 24, that was in 2012. I was very sick, too sick to work, and a doctor was like certain that I had a tumor. So I started thinking about cancer, and I thought, what if I had cancer? What if it's malignant and it's a high stage, because usually it's a high stage of cancer when you start to feel symptoms. And I thought, oh my gosh, what if I die? I'm only 24. And I had these regrets because I never did anything. I never took any chances. So I kind of told myself, if I ever can like live a normal life again, I'm gonna do what I can. And I was kind of lucky to have that realization at a young age, because people don't have realizations like that until they're a bit older. So like it affected me in that it held me back a lot.
And so, when you had that kind of that epiphany, I guess, when you, I guess, were kind of reflecting on your life, was that kind of what led you to getting some help and support to deal with the anxiety that you were experiencing?
Yeah, that was probably might have been like the main thing. Just telling myself that I need to take what I would think of as risks or chances, and not let my fear hold me back.
So, did you try and help yourself before you sought, you know, somebody to kind of help you work through it? Had you ever tried to deal with your anxiety on your own initially to try and lessen it?
Um, People would suggest meditation to me, and I tried it like once. I just tried the kind of meditation where you just try and empty your mind, and I didn't really feel anything. So I was like, well, this doesn't work for me, and I didn't know what else to do. And then I went to go see a therapist who gave me some coping mechanisms.
So how did you feel when you went to see a therapist? I know that that can be a hard thing just to make a decision to go see somebody. Did you feel comfortable doing that?
For the first time, not entirely. I mean, I did have some anxiety just about talking about how I was feeling because I used to be like really private, and I grew up around people who always said whenever I was feeling like sad or scared to just toughen up. So I just kept everything in. But then once I started talking and seeing this therapist be very receptive and very open, and just going like, nodding, saying yeah, and saying it's apparent why you would feel that way. Like it was very validating. And then I became much more comfortable.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm. I feel kind of lucky that I got a good therapist because if the first person that I saw wasn't a good therapist, I don't know if I would have went back.
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of a risky thing to do if you're really private too.
Mm-hmm. That's even for people who aren't like particularly private, they might have tried opening up to a friend, and if that person said just get over it or just didn't know how to respond or maybe said something that made them feel worse, that they might feel like they can't talk to people.
Yeah, I think it would be challenging for sure. So the other thing, I guess that kind of leads into the next thing I wanted to ask you is what are some of the stigmas?
Oh, before we go there, I just want to talk about how my therapist helped me. Didn't
Oh, I
really go
would
into that.
love to hear that.
So I talked about my anxieties and asked like how I could get through them, and she said the best way to get over anxiety or anything that you fear is through exposure therapy, where you kind of expose yourself to things that make you anxious or afraid, just like a little bit at a time. So, what's something that I did first? Driving on the highway used to make me super nervous. Um, Especially if I was driving by myself, I just have this fear that like I could get into an accident or a deer would come out of nowhere or I would zone out and then drive into someone. So like, driving little distances at a time and just seeing that it's not that like nothing's likely to happen, and as long as I can keep my focus on the road, then I'm good. And just kind of telling myself that if I can push through this, it might get better. So I got to a point where I was able to do stand up comedy. Um, I went on stage, I was super nervous. I tried to find excuses to not show up, but I told myself, if I don't do this because I'm anxious, I'm going to be looking back on myself with regret for probably the rest of my life. And I don't want to be in that spot where I was at 24 with regret. So I would just say, go for it because you don't want to be on your deathbed with full of regrets. So I would just expose myself to things here and there. And I, my therapist taught me how to identify my emotions and the root causes of that. And then I found guided meditation, which is a type that worked for me. I learned about grounding, where you try to like make the one part of your body, maybe just your feet are touching the ground so that you know that you're safe and it could keep yourself from disassociating.
Wow, so did you feel safer kind of going through all these different processes, having that therapist right with you.
Yeah.
That's great. It's, you know, I think it's a really positive message to Juliana that when there's something that we can't fix by ourselves, to, there's people out there that have all these great tools and techniques and support systems that can actually help us get through that, um, not alone anymore. So, that's great for you that you reached out and you got help when you needed it, and it actually made a huge difference. And
Yeah, I often say that therapy saved my life.
wow. And you did stand up comedy. I don't think there's very many people that would actually have the courage to do something like that. Now, that seems like one of the most intimidating situations to put yourself into.
It is. There are actually quite a few comics who have like an anxiety attack before a show and they still do it because it's what they love.
Wow. I just picture going on stage and the heckling. It must have been pretty scary for you the first time you did that. How was that?
It was very scary going up to it. I was like shaking. I don't think anyone noticed though, so that's good. Like my mouth was so dry. I was so nervous, but afterwards I was so glad I did it.
Wow. I'm so proud of you.
I was proud of
That's
myself.
amazing.
Yeah, it was always one of my dreams. I love comedy.
So in your video, your broken video, is that clip of you on stage, is that the same time that you was that your first time or a different time?
That was the first time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. So, just a reminder that Juliana has a documentary that she produced, and she actually has a clip of herself on stage when she did that. So, that was your part of your exposure therapy that you were using for your anxiety then.
Yeah, it kind of was. And I did do it again a year later, and I was a little bit less nervous.
Wow, you're pretty brave. Okay, so anything else that your therapist gave you as, other things to try?
I believe she told me that if I feel like I don't have anyone to talk to, I can just write because, we all have paper and pens and pencils. And it still feels good to just write something, even if no one's ever going to see it. You can write something down and then throw it away, you can burn it. Um, and she listened to me. And that was probably the biggest thing, to someone who listened to me and said, yeah, I can see why that you have these fears and why you feel depressed. I mean, it makes total sense. And just that kind of validation from someone who's a professional. Because sometimes I would feel like I should be doing better, but I have to remind myself that I'd been through so much that, and that, it's not my fault. It's like that scene from what's that movie called? Good Will Hunting, when Robin Williams' character is telling Matt Damon it's not his fault, and then Matt Damon just like breaks down because he had a really traumatic childhood.
Oh, great. So that emotional understanding, I guess, that she created with you was very, quite healing then.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who have anxiety or depression or whatever other mental health problem, it's not so much that we feel alone or that there's no one to talk to. It's that there's so little people that really understand. Like, that's what you're looking for. It's not just, for some people, they might just want to vent. But for someone like myself, I just want them to, like, truly understand what I'm feeling.
I think that's a really important message for all of us too,
Mm-hmm.
is we need to know the experience more, and to realize that sometimes if we've never gone through it, we're comparing it to something that doesn't seem as maybe acute as what you're experiencing. So we really need to educate ourselves. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and that's something I need to remind myself too. Like, my experiences are not the norm. So it's not someone else's fault that they're not understanding. If they had never felt it before, they won't be able to imagine it because we can only really imagine things that we felt. We can't just imagine a completely new feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I just got to remind myself that I need to be more patient and not just get frustrated because no one understands me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there are people out there. There are support groups on social media or like in real life. Um, Sometimes a quick Google
What is
search.
that again?
There are like support groups on
Okay.
social media. There might be something on Facebook or there are some. Sometimes you can find there's an anxiety and depression support group in Prince Albert. I don't know if they still have it, probably. And it was just this group of people that would meet twice a week and just talk about things to other people who are also going through maybe the same things or who are like feeling the same things.
Oh, that's a great idea. People
Mm-hmm.
that actually understand each other.
And just like knowing that the other people there are also kind of looking for the same thing that you are, like that helps you know that it's like a safe space that you can be open and they're not going to like ridicule you or tell you that you're too sensitive.
So that issue of stigma, you've run across that in the past then?
Yeah, I there have been times where I say like I before I started doing like therapy and whatnot, like while I was too sick to work, my anxiety was really high, and that was because my adrenaline was high, like the actual norepinephrine, this catecholamine. It's it's a part of your adrenaline response. So that was like always high, and it made me very anxious. Like I would startle super easily. I would jump. I was like a cat. If
Oh,
someone moved too quickly, I would like jump a little bit. It was so weird. But like my older brother just did not understand it because he's not an anxious person at all. And I'd be like, no, I can't drive. It makes me really anxious. And he'd be like, just take some medication. My friend has anxiety. He's on medication. He's good now. And I like back then I was very sensitive to medications, and some of them would make me feel worse actually. And I would
hmm.
try to explain that, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're just overthinking things." So if someone responds like that, I just don't want to talk about it to them anymore. And sometimes I don't even want to talk to them anymore. And at that time, our relationship was kind of strained. And but I also see stuff on social media. Someone kind of older, like maybe 50s, posted something about how they think that anxiety is people being too lazy to address their worries. And I was like, I was so upset at that because for people with generalized anxiety, it's more than just worrying. For someone like myself, my flight response is overactive and I can't just turn it off. It's not always just worrying. It's not something that we can just control. If I start
Hmm.
overthinking, I can't just stop my mind. That's just how it is. My mind's is very active, and that's something that's pretty common with people who have ADHD. That's why we take stimulants because our brains are understimulated. So my brain's just trying to like create more activity sometimes. And anxiety, like I said before, sometimes it can have a physical cause. It can be your brain can have overactive areas, or there could be an actual chemical imbalance. And sometimes it's even caused by an unhealthy gut. So I paid more attention to my diet. I'm trying to focus on my gut health, and when I do, I feel a difference in how I think, and my emotions kind of feel more balanced as well.
Wow. Well, that's great because you're being so proactive, and I really it. it's too bad that you had to go through, some of those negative attitudes and uh saying that it's kind of like laziness on the social
Mm-hmm.
media post. I've seen and heard some some pretty judgmental negative comments too about anxiety and minimizing, I guess, what it really is and mislabeling it as worrying.
But that's kind of
Uh,
the point of this podcast, to help some and inform others.
I know that for myself, I I actually was very not supportive
Mm-hmm.
to someone in my own family because I had that same misconception and same attitude. Uh, Basically, not really believing, I guess, that anxiety was any worse than worrying gone out of control. And I honestly thought that all you had to do was just kind of get a grip on it and you'd be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so wrong. I was so wrong. Um, I really didn't know the difference of the experience between worrying, which I had gone through, and anxiety, which I hadn't gone through. I really didn't understand how different they really were.
I I I think I read it somewhere on the internet. Someone said you can't change your behavior from the past, but you can change your behavior now so that you change it for the future. So you trying to inform yourself about anxiety, you're changing your behavior so that you can maybe help people in the future or now.
Yeah. And I do have a couple of phobias
Mm-hmm.
when I likely, it is very similar to what you had talked about when you had a panic reaction. So I definitely know what that feels like.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's very different from worrying. So, doing that comparison at the beginning, that's very, very helpful for me to really kind of focus in on what it is you're talking about. Because that's not something that you can just turn off, like when I have that reaction to the phobia that I have. So, very different for sure.
another another thing I saw on the internet. Someone trying to explain what anxiety was like. They said, imagine you're a kid and you're sitting in one of those like four-legged chairs and you're tipping it back, and that feeling you get for a moment when it falls, it's like that, but long term.
Oh, wow.
And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, it's like that. Especially when you're like in the moment or like in the period, because anxiety lasts much longer than a moment, unfortunately.
Wow. Yeah, so it's a feeling of fear, like you had said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the things that people shouldn't say to someone that has anxiety? Let's say you're feeling anxious and maybe someone's trying to help. What are
Saying,
some things not to say?
uh, don't say just get over it. Uh, don't say just stop overthinking or just stop worrying. Don't say just stop because you can't just turn it off. Those are probably the biggest things. Oh, when people say, what do you have to be worried about? That makes you feel like you shouldn't have these fears and that like there's something wrong with you. And especially when it comes to depression as well, saying like, what do you have? Why do you even feel like this? Things are going well for you. Like, you don't know what else is happening. You don't know what it's like to live in someone's head, especially if they have like a mental illness.
That sounds so judgmental to say something like that to someone,
Mm-hmm.
like you're ungrateful.
Yeah.
Wow. Any other things that might not be very supportive, I guess?
Yeah, like um just don't be dismissive, I would say.
Okay.
Like just listen to the person and accept what they say.
So if somebody is trying to question the experience, then that can be something that's not very supportive for you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's good to know too. So, and one thing we were talking about when we were just kind of planning this out is the upside of anxiety, and which kind of doesn't sound like there is one, but um, there's a purpose for the feeling. So, what are some of the things that you learned about Juliana about the positive things about anxiety?
One thing I noticed from myself and a lot of people that I know who also go through a lot of anxiety is that we're very sensitive and more empathetic. So I looked into it, and there's actually been shown to be a correlation between anxiety and empathy. And I think the world needs people who are very empathetic because those are the people that like do good, and sometimes they're the ones that make change. And fear is our intuition, and we can learn to use that to our advantage, like predicting the behavior of others. Um, I finished reading a book called The Gift of Fear, and the author is this guy who had a pretty traumatic childhood, and he would be afraid a lot, but he learned that he could predict the behavior of like his mom or his many stepfathers by looking for subtle clues. And then he came up with a system. I can't remember what it's called, but it's now being used by the United States Secretary of Defense. So he used all of those fears that he felt as a child to help the Secretary of Defense also learn how to predict the behavior of people. For anyone who has anxiety, I would really recommend that book. It's called The Gift of Fear. It says like so much. If you have a fear, like if you're a woman and you fear being sexually assaulted, he has some tips on predicting the behavior of like strange men, predicting the behavior of burglars, like so many different situations. And if you just pay attention to these like subtle clues in people and the things that they say, if a person is talking to you like a strange man and he's giving too many details, that's something to be aware of. And if something feels off, he always said that they were likely right. That the person that he was talking to would look back and say, "Oh, started to feel kind of apprehensive about something when they said one thing," but they tried to just brush it off because they didn't want to appear rude. And he said that a lot of women get into these bad situations because they don't want to appear rude to people. And he said it's okay to be rude if eventually your life could be at stake. And he talks about the gift of fear, like and using our intuition to our advantage. It's a good book.
Wow, that's it's I I like how you brought that into this whole discussion because a lot of times I think we kind of say, oh, well, this is an illness or this is a condition or whatever, something negative.
Yeah.
But that sometimes it is a quality, a positive attribute we have that it has its good side that we're not even aware of, and just calling it a gift is such a great way of looking at it, and the fact that you have that increased capacity for empathy and intuition, like that's just a beautiful way of looking at anxiety in a positive way. So thanks so much for sharing that. That's great.
And something that helped me look for like positives anywhere I could was when I started practicing gratitude. There are, I think I talked about this app in the last podcast, an app called Let's Meditate. It had one on gratitude, and the the narrator, I guess, would say, think about a negative experience and try to find something good that came out of it or a good lesson that you learned. And so I started doing that more and more. And I can now look at that period where, 5 years, where I was too sick to work and living in isolation and really depressed and anxious, and feel grateful that it happened because I have grown so much. And without that, I wouldn't have gone to therapy. I wouldn't have started meditation. I wouldn't have started smudging. I wouldn't have learned more about my culture. Like, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd probably still be private and very closed off and just lonely still and too afraid to do things. And I no longer look at that and feel bitter about that, because I used to sometimes feel that, and I can now notice when I'm starting to feel bitterness about something or frustration, and say, do something positive, or just like, hey, you're feeling bitter, go smudge. You're starting to feel anxious, try to go meditate or something.
Well, that's great. Um, that's such a hopeful story. Just talking about how taking I guess a situation, a negative situation, and instead of looking at it as this is something bad that happened to me, it's like more of a turning point kind of way of looking at it, as this was a positive turning point because you developed and learned so much about yourself. And that's a good way of looking at things. Like, it's I'm sure going to provide a lot of inspiration to people that really wanted to work on their anxiety and eventually see it in such a positive way.
Yeah, I'm really glad that I had to go. I guess I am glad I had to go through that. There's something about like hitting your own rock bottom that can make you do better. Like, I was in an incredibly low place, and instead of becoming very bitter and angry and you know, hating the world because I got sick, I came out a better person. And that's not something that a lot of people could probably say, because sometimes we go through bad experiences and it just makes us like angry at the world or at the universe or whatever. You get thinking like, why me?
Yeah, and that just sounds like it's such something that a lot of people would probably question is, yeah, why me? And feel like, I don't know if I can, fix this or get or
Mm.
feel better. So, your story is very powerful and very healing, when you share, what you went through. Um, I just want to ask, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's kind of, hasn't tried anything yet, but they know that, this sounds really familiar what Juliana described. I think I do have anxiety too. What kind of advice or tips would you give to that person to, uh, work on that and start to feel some recovery?
I would say listen to your fears. Uh, Try to look into and find the root cause of what's causing anxiety. It's often caused by uncertainty. We tend to fear what could happen, but the mere fact that you're worrying about something is a predictor that it isn't currently happening. Um, I would say explore some calming techniques like breathing exercises where you just like take a deep inhale and a deep exhale. Doing that, you can actually feel your body calming. Grounding exercises. I would suggest seeing a doctor. You can get a blood test. Ask if you can um, look for any like nutritional deficiencies. I think some low B vitamins could cause feelings of anxiety and even depression. Um, and there are some supplements that you could take if you're down with going that route. Go to any drugstore, ask about like magnesium or L-theanine to the pharmacist because they're very likely to be knowledgeable on supplements because, they studied, I think they studied nutrition and also, pharmacology. But like listening to your body, if you notice that you feel more anxious after eating certain foods, maybe cut those out. And just remember that it's okay to put your mental health first.
That's great. Any suggestions for getting some of that outside support? Maybe some good places to check, or how do you get a hold of a therapist?
You can pretty much Google like therapist near me, or you could go to Sask Health. If you go through Sask Health, there's a bit of a wait. You could see a private therapist, but they're very expensive, and you will have to pay unless you have some kind of extra insurance or benefits through work. But
I think
it's a couple months waiting if you go through Sask Health, but I'd say it's worth it.
okay. And I just wanted to remind our First Nation listeners that there is a health benefit through your Indian status that you can, if your therapist is on the list of approved therapists, that those costs can be covered as well. So that's a good thing to know as well. And then insurance.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know, like for people who are non-indigenous and who don't have benefits, I don't know if it's free through Sask Health, but I'm sure like you could just call mental health in like Prince Albert or whatever city or town you're in and just ask them.
yeah, and if you go through the province, provincial mental health, yes, it is free.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
good to know. It is good to know.
Oh, and for anyone who's in Prince Albert, there is emergency counseling. I think it's like Monday to Friday between 9 a.m. and noon, and then 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. You can just go to the Vic Hospital at the bottom to mental health and say you need to see a counselor, and you can see a counselor that day.
That's great.
Yeah.
Anything else we should know?
My mind just went blank. I don't know. Nothing that I can think of adding.
Well, I learned a lot, and I certainly appreciate. I think the thing I learned the most, Juliana, was the feeling of anxiety. The
Mm-hmm.
actual feeling of anxiety. Your description of it was just so vivid. I think I truly have a much better, more accurate idea of the experience.
Oh,
And I think it's going to definitely give me a lot more uh, ability to be supportive
mm-hmm.
because I'm seeing it more as a fear response than a worrying response now. And that's totally different. And I appreciate the time that you took to really describe that for me.
I
And
was kind of worried about if I wouldn't describe it well enough because sometimes I'm not that great at describing it. So I really have to like think about what I'm gonna say beforehand.
well, you did a great job.
Awesome.
Very helpful. So, I think that's it for questions. And thank you so much for talking about anxiety today and sharing your personal experience and how well things are going today for you.
Yeah, and it took a long time. Like I think I really started to make an effort in like 2017. that I think, yeah, that's when I went to see a therapist and started doing taking more initiative to work on myself.
Great.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd like to add. It's a slow process. You know, you're not gonna immediately feel better the first with the first thing you try. It's slow change. And one day you might just be like, "Oh, hey, I've been feeling pretty good for a while." Like it kind of just hits you how well you're doing because it happens gradually.
Oh, that's great to know. And
Mm-hmm.
so I like how you listed all the different things that you do and have done. So it's not just one thing all the time. You're
Yeah.
doing a bunch of different things and you're just kind of trying what works. And sometimes it works, and I guess sometimes it doesn't, but you just, you know, adding more tools to your toolkit, they say.
I'm like my own guinea pig, just
Yeah.
using myself for like trial and error.
Great. Thank you so much, Juliana. And this is a great second podcast episode. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you to whoever's listening to this.
Great.
All right.
Okay, then. Thank you and bye.
Bye.